Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Burr Network. This is RM here for another episode of PGS Moving Image. And tonight we are going to feature another cinematic IP that is incredibly popular, pretty much changed a lot of things in the movie industry, and started off with a movie that won for Movie of the Year. I'm talking about the Rocky legacy and their cinematic IP. And we have with us today a very good friend of mine, a writer and creator, Russell Whitfield. Russell, welcome to PGS Moving Image. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you, RM. It's a Friday night here in the UK, hence a little cheeky glass of wine to chat about Mr. Balboa and his movies. So yeah, I'm excited to get cracking on this. How are you?
I'm doing well. It is very rainy here in New York. So, a lot of times when it gets rainy like this, you don't feel like going out and doing anything. But I had a ton of stuff to do and I went out and I took care of business. So I am eager to talk about Rocky.
Taking care of business in NYC. I like it. Long
Absolutely.
Island, right?
Yes. Absolutely. That's I haven't left the Long Island, so technically speaking, I didn't really go into the city much, but it is true, and it is so exciting to finally talk about Rocky because we've been talking about the cinematic IP and many other cinematic IPs, Russ, over the past few years, haven't we?
We have indeed, but I did catch up on the edition of this show a little while ago, the Planet of the Apes one with Cameron and Retro and Lorena, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. Because I'm a big fan of the Planet of the Apes film, so I really quite enjoyed that one. So thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah, we did do a little something like this, but maybe a year or so ago. I think we kicked off with Underworld, didn't we? We started. We never actually finished it though. I think we got as far as the third one, which I really liked, and then I did my research for Awakenings, but we just never got around to doing it because I think your channel started to take off, and then I got busy, and then I was in the States for a while, and then I was back, and it was all a bit of a bit of a blur. But maybe we should finish Underworld one of these days.
We certainly should. It's certainly a unique IP, and I think it would be great to talk about it because of what they were able to accomplish. Such a cohesive set of films that look like they're from the same story. You cannot mistake an underworld film for any other group or any other storyline. So I think they were able to achieve something cinematically, very specifically cinematically, that's pleasing. And of course, I love the we are lichens cheer, which I promise you, Russ, when we review that cinematic IP, I am going to go ahead and scream at the top of my lungs that scene that I love so much that Michael Sheen does. So I can't wait for that. So tonight, Russ, we are talking about, I would think, an equally impressive cinematic IP, Rocky. And for many of you out there, for me personally, I consider it one of the greatest sports films in the world. And it's an incredible legacy, pretty much created by Sylvester Stallone in 1976. It was the highest grossing movie. It won for best movie, was written and starred Sylvester Stallone. So not only did he write it, he starred in it. And we do know that Sylvester Stallone, I guess, fairly recently mentioned that it was inspired by the real life story of Chuck Wepner, who actually fought Muhammad Ali in the ring. And I think they came to some kind of settlement at some point. But with this being said, I kind of do want to talk about the genius behind this IP, Russ, because it's been incredible. We've all seen the performance as an actor and an athlete that Stallone has done in pretty much all of the films, and the soulful writing he continues to put forth. This film changed the world by capturing our hearts and bringing us back to the basics, the pursuit of happiness in a careful and well thought out storytelling style meant to evoke honesty and integrity. How would you describe the film and pretty much the IP in your own words?
The first Rocky. Well, I don't really think the first Rocky is actually a sports film in and of itself. I think uh, the Rocky 1976 is more of a love story come drama with boxing. It's not so much about the boxing as it is about Rocky's hero's journey. Um, the IP as a whole, world changing. I mean, you said it's up there with Underworld. I think Rocky's many levels above underworld in terms of its impact on the world. I mean, it's such an incredible franchise. Uh, in some ways, like Stallone himself, it just keeps coming back. You know, it just keeps moving forward, as he says in Rocky Balboa. You know, certainly as a young kid, it really impacted my life. I saw Rocky 3 in the cinema, and I must have been maybe 11. So it was a long time ago. I think it was 1982. I think that was. So I would have been 11, and it just blew me away. I remember and my dad liked to drink. I mean, he's dead now, but not my stepfather, my real dad. He loved to drink, so he just left me in the cinema, and he went across the road to the pub, and I sat in there, and I think I watched it 2 or 3 times in the one day, and I was absolutely blown away. And I went back home, and my stepdad, who worked up in London at the time, he knew all the dodgy people around Soho, and they got me an illegal copy of Rocky 3 on video back in the day. And of course, then I got hold of Rocky 1 and Rocky 2. And of course, then 1984, Rocky 3 came out, Rocky 4 came out, Rocky 5 was a bit of a disappointment. And then there was like a hiatus after that. But certainly the first one, um, it, it came out at a time, and obviously I'm English, but I do know the history of this franchise fairly well. um, at that time in the United States, it was post Vietnam, post Watergate, all of this stuff that was going on, and the cinema of that time in America very much reflected the reality of modern American life. I mean, Death Wish had come out in 1973. There are all these kind of like gritty, hardcore films, right? Rocky came out and sort of challenged all of that. This was like a feel good movie that was essentially very pro America. I mean, everyone, it's a cliche now. Everyone says, "Oh, Rocky's the American dream," but that was such a shock at the time to have this uplifting movie. And Apollo Creed says, he believes that America's the land of opportunity, and that's why he's going to give a club fighter an opportunity to fight for the greatest title in the whole world. And it's this story of like an American the American seizing his chance and going for it, even though he doesn't actually win in the end. And I quite like that Rocky, no spoilers, it was 1976. I do like that Rocky doesn't win in the end, because just before the final, his showdown with Apollo Creed, he has this little monologue to Adrian, his girlfriend at the time, and he says to her, nobody's ever gone the distance with Creed before. And if I can get, if that bell rings and I'm still standing, then I'll know for the first time in my life that I wasn't just another bum from the neighborhood. And that's basically what he's been sort of told his whole life, even when, at the beginning of the film, Mickey takes his locker away and gives his locker to somebody else, and all of that. Mickey says to him, because you had the talent to become a good fighter, but instead of that, you become a leg breaker for a cheap second-rate loan shark. And Rocky says it's a living, and Mickey says it's a waste of life. So this whole journey is about Rocky proving to himself and everybody else that he's not that guy, and he can do it. And he loses, but he wins in the end because he proves to himself. And yeah, I love that film. It's a really emotional film, helped, of course, by the wonderful music of Bill Conti. And it's so funny now, like all these things are mopes, are memes and tropes. Like dun, 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 all the Rocky music, and it's like it's such a joke now, running up the steps to the art museum and all the rest of it, and everybody does it. But of course, back then, we hadn't nobody had heard that stuff before. I didn't see it in the cinema. I was way too young. Maybe my mum took me when I was really small. I seem to remember her taking me because she seemed to like Paulie. She thought he was great. But yeah, first film was absolutely fantastic. But as I say, more of a drama, love story, street level movie with boxing in it.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent description of the franchise, the cinematic franchise in particular. And one of the things that stands out for me in this franchise is, and I think you might have touched on it a little bit, is it has to do with where a film where the state of mind of the characters in the film is as important as the state of mind of those who are watching it. Did the film cause you to become introspective about your approach to work and life, as you got older?
Well, certainly when I was 11 and I saw Rocky 3, I was convinced I was going to be a boxer. And my dad used to take me to boxing in King's Cross, and yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I was really into Superman. I've been into Superman my whole life, and I remember saying to my mum, you know, Mum, I could never be a superhero. I could never do that, but I can be a boxer. And Mum didn't want me to be a boxer. But my dad took me to King's Cross. And as much as I'd love to say I was good at it, I'll never be any good at fighting as long as I've got a hole in my ass. I'm just no good at that sort of thing. My daughter was brilliant, and I just don't have that gene. But yeah, I did go boxing. Um, but yes, those films have. I wouldn't say affected me. Or I would say they've been there my whole life. Rocky has been there my whole life, right? You know, it's films I go back to time and time and time and time and time and time again. I absolutely love them, and I love them all for different reasons. I would say they're also autobiographical for Sylvester Stallone. Certainly, the first one, you know, he had no money in his. I think he had $100 in his bank account left. He had to sell his dog, the dog that's in the film Butkus. Um, and they offered him hundreds of thousands of dollars to give him the rights. And Stallone was insistent that he was going to play this role. And the producers finally sort of gave him a chance when they slashed the budget of the film. But he just knew in his heart that he had to do it. And he said often in interviews afterwards, like he felt he had to do it. And he said, you know, if I'd have sold those rights and that film had gone on to be as successful as it was in the end, I would have probably wanted to kill myself, you know. But he said, at least if I went in and I wrote the film and I started the film and it was my story, and I did my best and it failed, at least I know I did my best and I gave it my best shot. Much like Rocky himself, who, like Stallone, has nothing, is living in a crappy place, and really has no prospects, and gets this one shot, like an aspiring writer with a screenplay that gets in to see the producer, and the producer's prepared to give him a shot. In the same way Apollo Creed and Miles Juergens give Rocky the shot.
Yeah, well said. And I know that Sylvester Stallone and it's has said that it's a film that's not necessarily a boxing film or a sports film, but I can't help but focus on the boxing. A lot of times the promotional photos of Rocky are always Rocky in, boxing attire, so to speak. And, I think that boxing has a certain distinction in the sports world internationally, often with an entire country or sometimes even the world watching a match with bated breath. And I do want to ask for you, why has boxing in the 20th century become such a defining symbol of success and prestige for so many?
In the 20th century, well, I mean, we boxing and wrestling are our oldest sports. If you go back and look at Egyptian tombs, they've got pictures of boxers on it, and it was really turned into an art form by the ancient Greeks. But the 20th century, why that has such resonance, I think, because the 20th century was especially with the heavyweights, was the era of American supremacy. If you go back through the 20th century. Mike Tyson was in the 80s. You had Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, George Foreman in the 60s and the 70s, Rocky Marciano in the 50s, and you can go all the way back through. Oh God, what's his name? Guy in the 1920s. It'll not John O'Sullivan. It'll come back to me anyway. But America reigned supreme in terms of heavyweights in those days. It's simply not the case in the 21st century. You had Lennox Lewis, who's British Canadian. Then you had the Klitschko's, who are Ukrainian. Then you had Anthony Joshua, who's British. Then you've got Tyson Fury, who's British. You had Deontay Wilder, but Fury knocked him out. And now you've got Alexander Usyk, who's Ukrainian. But certainly for the 20th century, yeah, America reigns supreme, and that's why so much furore in American entertainment was around boxing. But it's a visceral sport, and you're right. There's nothing quite like it. I don't think it's not like MMA or kickboxing or something like that. That there are rules, and it's the loneliest place in the world, isn't it? The boxing ring. I know. I mean, I've been in it myself, and I've been on the receiving end, and I can tell you it's quite it's quite lonely. But I think we all want to see people overcome and do well. And also I think it speaks to that, sort of part of us that, like the Romans had the gladiators, these are our sort of modern day gladiators. And there is something, people like to see knockouts, or many people like to see knockouts. I'm not going to say everybody, because some people are really anti-boxing, and and all the rest of it. But a lot of people like to see the punch up, and they want to see the knockouts, and they want to see the skill, and they want to see people bite down on the mouthpiece, or the gum shield as we call it in England, and power through. And seeing men, and nowadays especially as well women, who are really, like, women's boxing is really coming to the fore now, achieve something that they themselves can see themselves through. I'm trying to think of the word, vicariously
Mhm.
see themselves through. And if only I could do that. And 99 out of 100 people can't do that, and there's the odd 100 that, are fighters. Because you can teach someone to box, but you can't teach someone to be a fighter. And that I do know. My mate Steve is just hard. He's just hard. He's really good at kung fu, and he's a brilliant fighter. My daughter's the same. She's just a fighter. Whereas you could teach you or me to box, and we'd learn how to box, but we'd never be fighters. And I think that's a real difference. There's something within these people that marks them out as different to me. I mean, I don't know how tough you are, Rita, if you're a boxer or whatever, but certainly, myself, I'm not no good at fighting. But some people are. They have a talent for it.
Yeah, certainly. I am not a boxer, so I just have to put that out there. Surprise, Kel surprise. Um, and there are a lot of boxing films out there, and more recently, we are seeing films that deal with kind of life before and after the fight. The off time, which clearly Rocky does a lot of.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of Rocky deciding whether or not he's going to fight or not fight. Not just Rocky, but a lot of the characters are deciding this, and it is actually very truthful to the boxing world in a sense. Do you think that the sequels were successful in showing us this, and why?
Yeah, like I said, I feel that all of the Rocky films are sort of semi or autobiographical. I'm not saying they're complete, rips of his own life, because they're not. But if you look at the first one, he comes from nothing. Then in the second one, he's got all this money and doesn't really know what to do with it, and he's kind of casting around for ideas, and Rocky ends up losing a lot of his money, and he has to take the fight with the rematch with Creed, who stops being the sort of affable antagonist and becomes a proper antagonist, because feels that he's been embarrassed in the first fight, and he needs to prove to the world and to himself that he is a superior athlete to Rocky. He literally says, I'm going to prove that this lucky club fighter, and that's what he was. Lucky doesn't have the skill or stamina to last 5 minutes in the ring with a superior athlete like me. That's what Apollo Creed says. So his reason is to sort of stamp Rocky down. But Rocky's, Rocky. That's why he's called Rocky. Um, so yeah, I think that's the story of the second one, is Rocky overcoming his own limitations and believing it. Well, it's actually always Adrian that kind of talks Rocky round. Like, she doesn't want him to fight at first, and then because she's pregnant and all that stuff, and then she has complications, and then she comes out of her coma and tells him to go and win. And once Rocky's got the backing and support of the people that he loves, then he can find that strength within himself. Rocky 3, you find him at the peak of his sort of powers, and it's the beginning of the 80s, and Rocky sort of goes from being well built to ripped, to shreds, and he's just, you know, muscle in that. And it's kind of like, even his hairstyle has changed. He's kind of got like 80s frizz hair, and I think Rocky 3 is sort of like the 80s entree. Rocky 4 is the original Rocky 4, because of course there's a director's cut, and there's the original, the Rocky 4 in and of itself, as it came out in 1984, is peak 80s.
It's my
It,
favorite one.
it's everybody's favorite one. Like, there are better films in
Yes.
that saga, but Rocky 4, everybody loves Rocky 4. I mean, it's got everything. It's peak 80s. It's literally peak 80s. There's a film critic on the internet, a guy called Patrick H. Willems, who I don't often agree with. But he set up a sort of scoring thing, and he picked a bunch of films from the 80s, and you could tell he wanted Top Gun to win, but it's actually, according to his own scoring system, Rocky 4 is the most 80s film you can possibly. I think 30% of the film is montage. training
We're
montages and all
we're
that.
gonna talk. We are going to talk about. Certainly, we are going to talk about training montages, Russ. But please continue and finish what you had to say about that.
Sure. And then, if we say sort of chronologically, then you had Rocky 5. Rocky 5 is the sort of bastard child of the Rocky uh trilogy, the black sheep of the family or whatever. Nobody seems to really like Rocky 5. Even Stallone himself admits that the film didn't quite work, but the film only doesn't work because Stallone wanted Rocky to die at the end, and then that film does kind of work if Rocky dies at the end of it in that street fight. But the studio said no, which gets into a whole other political thing, because Sylvester Stallone himself doesn't actually own the rights to Rocky. Chartoff and Winkler do, the producers. Um, but it just doesn't work on so many levels. You can kind of see what he was trying to do with it and take Rocky back to the streets, and he loses everything and all that kind of stuff. But it was so I don't know. It doesn't work very well. And then the Rocky franchise died after that because people were over it. People were over the 80s. People were over Rocky, basically. And as I say, these films are sort of autobiographical. That time, then coming into the 90s and the 2000s, Stallone himself like fell out of relevancy. Like him and Schwarzenegger, all these guys, they were all finished for many many years. And then years later, he gets the money together and makes Rocky Balboa, which is an absolute triumph. It's literally Sylvester Stallone's triumphant return, Rocky Balboa's triumphant return. As I said, these films reflect Stallone's life. And then we got the follow on, the Creed movies, of which the third one is coming out. But during the unspecified virus of unknown origin period, Stallone went back in and recut Rocky 4. Oh, sorry, my phone's ringing. Stallone went in and recut Rocky 4 and cut out some of the 80s bombast, in particular the robot, which was like which is a huge meme. But actually, the robot was a real robot, and the robot was developed by a doctor to help children with autism. And Stallone's own kid had autism, and that's why uh, the robots in the film to sort of promote that robot. And at the time, of course, it didn't end up taking off. We don't have autism robots now, but it was an idea in the 80s because hey, it was the 80s, right? But so Stallone goes in and he recuts Rocky 4. I think it's now called Rocky 4, Rocky versus Drago or something like that. And whilst Rocky 4 '84 is a brilliant, bombastic slice of 80s awesomeness and is a better and more enjoyable movie, Rocky versus Drago actually fits into the franchise much better than Rocky 4 does. Rocky 4 sort of stands out on its own with the giant Russian and the different music, like Vince DiCola does the music, which is the only time we don't get Bill Conti, and the whole film has a different feel. It stands apart. Whereas Rocky versus Drago fits into that. So if you were to watch them back to back, Rocky 4 isn't perhaps as awesome, Rocky versus Drago, but it feels nicer as a part of the jigsaw.
And Russ, why was the idea of Rocky fighting outside of his prime so appealing to so many?
Well, because we all want to. It's like all boxers, isn't it? We all want to think we've got one more fight left in us, you know. And I think with, I love that line as well. People think of Stallone as an actor, but Stallone himself says, I'm really a writer that acts. And he's a brilliant writer. And there's a line in Rocky Balboa, and he's talking to Paulie, he's talking about returning to fight again. And Paulie just looks at him and goes, "What, you haven't peaked yet?" And I think that's such a brilliant line, because like Stallone's, Rocky's like 60 at this point, and of course in Rocky 3, um, everybody thinks of Mr. T, and they always think of like pity the fool, right? That's a Mr. T line. Well, no, Stallone wrote that line. I don't hate Balboa, but I pity the fool, and I will take any man who did, I'll destroy any man who tries to take what I got. So, but yeah, what is it about him coming back? I think again, like on a sort of semi-autobiographical note, Rocky's talking to the boxing commission in Rocky Balboa, and he's saying, "Look, you're sitting up there, you're going to make a decision about my life. I'm fine. That result we got in Rocky 5, that was a mistake. I haven't got brain damage. I'm fine. I'm okay to fight. And why can't I? I'm a good boxer. That's my life. That's what I want to do. That's what gives my life purpose. And how can you sit up there who's never stepped in a ring and you've never been me? How can you make that decision? And of course, that just sort of so rarely would happen in real life, right? But we all had a moment as we. And I suppose there are younger people watching this who probably maybe haven't had those moments, but certainly as I get older, I'm 52 now. There are times in my life when I wish I could have done that, and if I could have turned around and just said what I really wanted to say and put it all out there. And that's what's great about movies and Rocky movies, especially if if there's a suite of movies or a franchise of movies or a cinematic universe, I guess, or a Rocky verse that wears their heart on their sleeves, it is certainly the Rocky franchise. I mean, they're loud and proud, they're sentimental, they're action packed, and they'll make you cry and they'll make you cheer, and you'll come out of a. Come on, when you watch Rocky 4, especially Rocky 4 84, you come out of there pumped up. You want to hit the gym. You want to go beat someone up. You want to go and run up mountains and all the rest of it.
Absolutely. And Russ, like some battles in history, boxing decisions can sometimes be controversial, and even with a certain outcome, can be perceived as either a win or a loss, depending upon who is looking at the fight. Does this double-sided possibility open the main theme up for contemplation, or is it wishful thinking?
I don't, so can you repeat the beginning part of that arm?
Yes,
I
like
didn't catch
battles
it.
in history, boxing decisions can sometimes be controversial as to who the winner was.
Hmm.
So even with a certain, even a certain outcome can be perceived as either a win or a loss, depending upon who is looking at it. Does this double-sided possibility open the main theme up for contemplation, or is it wishful thinking?
I think in real life, there've been some terrible boxing decisions, some terrible because boxing's like any other sport. There is corruption in it, and I think with boxing you can see it, writ very large. Like there's been some awful. There was a fight last year between a Scottish guy and an English guy, um, and the Scottish guy was the sort of unified champion, and the English guy clearly won that fight. He clearly won it. He knocked the other guy on his ass like three times. Yet they gave it to the Scottish guy. It was a travesty, and it was because basically what the deal was that he was supposed to go on and then unify, go up a weight, and then try and unify those titles. And Catterall, the British guy, won that. The English guy won that fight, and Taylor, they gave it to Josh Taylor, the Scottish guy, and people are still talking about it to this day. And if you go back through the annals of boxing history, there have been some terrible, terrible, terrible decisions, and indefensible decisions. Rocky doesn't leave you any. There's never going to be a bad decision in a Rocky movie. It just wouldn't. It would not serve the narrative to have Rocky robbed on points or Rocky win a dodgy points decision. So and I think if it, most of the time, if it goes to points, Rocky's probably going to lose. But if it doesn't go to points, then Rocky's going to knock you out, and that's kind of how those stories went. So in Rocky 1, it goes to points, and he loses. Rocky 2, they both get knocked over, and Rocky beats the count. Rocky 3, he gets knocked out, and then he knocks out Clubber Lang. Rocky 4, he knocks out, well, poor old Apollo. Apollo, a decision Stallone himself said he regrets. He wished he hadn't killed Apollo. He's one of his biggest regrets. He spoke about that in the making of Drago versus Rocky. But yes, Apollo, of course, gets killed, and then Rocky knocks out Drago. But in Rocky versus Drago, there's a moment in that film that is not in the original cut of Rocky 4, where Rocky's getting out of the ring and he looks at Drago and Drago looks at him, and they bang fists like they've had their war. The bad blood between them is over, because what they went through in that fight, you cannot come out of there as enemies. I love that thing. Rocky 5 is a street fight, and Rocky Balboa, it goes to points and he loses. So I don't think there's much room for controversy in a Rocky movie.
Well, you're right about how these films do fill you up with hope. It certainly is inspiring for you to get through any problems that come around. And I do have to ask this question: why do the boxing matches in the Rocky IP feel so heavy, as if the weight of the world is on the shoulders of the boxers and everybody involved?
Because Stallone's a brilliant writer. Okay, so if you, forget about Rocky for a minute. If you talk about any film that engages you and gets you behind the main character, and you follow that character on the journey, then you're gonna be in there. And it just so happens that, of course, with Rocky, he's a boxer, so you really are gonna feel it. Also, um, Stallone had the idea, which had never really been done before, that he was going to choreograph the fights himself. So they got a guy in who was a well known sort of stuntman coordinator, and Stallone fired him because he was saying, no, 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 don't do it like that. So what you have with and Dolph Lundgren has spoken about this as well. Like the script for Rocky Four was obviously like about like that. And he was like, okay. And then, and it's got, and then, they fight and Rocky wins kind of thing. And then the other script arrived, which is kind of like that, which is every single move, every single fight broken down. Literally, like Drago walks forward, throws a jab, throws another jab, then a right cross. Rocky covers up. Literally that is how it's written. And if you look on the extended or the special edition DVD of Rocky One, you can see Carl Weathers and Stallone fighting and practicing these moves, and it's really weird watching them in sort of in their sweats, their sweatpants and their vests and all the rest of it. And the moves that they're doing are exactly the same as they are in the final fight as they're rehearsing it, because Stallone broke it down, broke it down, broke it down. And I just see Tom. Yeah, I just saw a comment come up there from Tom Junior Jackson. Yeah, absolutely, there were real punches. Stallone nearly got killed in Rocky Four because Dolph Lundgren's a big guy, and he said, "Look, just hit me." And Dolph Lundgren did, and nearly stopped his heart. Like he was rushed. He had to be helicoptered to hospital, and it was all touch and go because if Dolph Lundgren's a karate champion, and if he hits you, you're gonna, and he's like, are you sure? Because Dolph Lundgren's like 6'6" or whatever he is, and Stallone's like 5'9". And he's like, yeah, 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 just do it. He was used to being hit. Mr. T had hit him, Carl Weathers had hit him, because it has to look realistic. And if they're not doing it to smash each other's faces in, but Stallone said, no, I really want you to go for it because it's the punch that sort of sends him across the ring, and he hit him in the chest. And yeah, that night he nearly died.
Yeah, that is quite remarkable that those punches are that the actual and there's a lot of physicality in this film, and none of it is imagined. It's 100% real strength. It's 100% toxic male. We're talking about, to the extreme, at least for me. However, and you may have already answered this, Russ, some of my favorite parts of the film are the moments we see Rocky interacting with those around him and the humanity that we see in these interactions time and time again. Explain what you think is at the heart of this franchise and why it feels so good to watch these moments.
Well, because I think Rocky Balboa in himself is a fundamentally decent guy. He's just a nice man that is, he loves his wife, he loves his family, and he wants to do the best for the people around him. And it just so happens that he does have this thing within him that makes him want to compete and want to be a fighter. But if you talk to most people in and around the boxing world, if you meet a boxer, they're going to be, some more often than not, outside of the ring, they're the nicest guys you could possibly meet. Well, you put them inside the ring, they just become a different person, and this competitiveness and their will to win comes through. But I just think, Rocky, Rocky in a way is kind of a bit like Superman. He's a very sort of idealized character, and he sort of speaks to what we could be, and perhaps what we should be. You never really see Rocky lose his temper that often. He loses his temper in the first one when Mickey, sort of comes back to him and wants to now be his trainer after, getting rid of his locker and all the rest of it. And Rocky starts shouting, but he's not really shouting at Mickey. He's shouting at his life's frustration, like, I'm 30, my legs are going, I'm going to get my face smashed in. And he starts going, Mickey's walking down the street. And then after Rocky's outburst, what does he do? He goes running after Mickey and puts his arm around him as if to say, look, I'm really sorry I lost my temper. He's a fundamentally decent man that you want to see do well. He loves his wife, he loves his country, and yeah, he's a great guy. Why wouldn't you want Rocky to win?
Well, you know something, Russ, there's another element to this, and we don't always see it, but men have feelings and emotions. And I personally am so touched by the tender way that Stallone portrays Rocky. And he's also incredibly strong and a masculine man as well. How important was it to see this somewhat more whole representation of a man?
Well, I think, it wasn't so much of a big deal back in the day, was it? I mean, people just this sort of like, uh, the representation we see of men now in or it's not, I wouldn't say, yeah, of men and women in cinema is an anomaly. It certainly wasn't like that, but back in the day, so it wasn't so much of a big deal. I would actually sort of flip it. Rocky's real strength, when Rocky has a crisis, it's Adrian that gives him the strength to carry on, because like he often questions himself. He thinking in Rocky 3, he's training with Apollo to fight Clubber Lang, who's knocked him out in 2 rounds, and he can't get it together. And eventually, Adrian challenges him on the beach, and she says, what, you know what's going on, essentially. And Rocky, and he says, because I'm afraid. All right, do you want to hear me say it? Do you want to break me down? For the first time in my life, I'm afraid. And she says, well, there's nothing wrong with being afraid. And she says, well, for me, there is. And she says, what, you're human, aren't you? And, she says, look, you've got to realize that when all the smoke is cleared and people are through chanting your names, you know, it's just going to be us. You can't live like this. You have to face this fear. Otherwise, it's going to haunt you for the rest of your life. Mickey dying wasn't your fault. You can't carry that around with you. You've got to face this man and face your own fears. And of course, then you get bam, 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 and an excellent training montage. And Rocky finds his strength. The same in uh, Rocky 4, when Adrian says to him, "You can't win," and he says, "Adrian always tells the truth." And then he drives off and has an awesome montage sequence of flashbacks from all the other movies to Robert Tepper's "There's No Easy Way Out," and it's such an awesome song. And he's training and he's doing okay, but it's when Adrian turns up in Russia, all of a sudden, then you get you get the second Hearts on Fire
Yes.
montage going on there. And it's interesting then. um I guess we can sort of skip over Rocky 5 really, but it's interesting in Rocky Balboa. And Stallone was talking about it. He had to phone up Talia Shire and say, look, I know we spoke about Rocky 5, Rocky 6, but I'm gonna have to kill you off. And she was obviously devastated. And his reasoning was, how many times can I write a movie where Rocky has to go do something, has a crisis of confidence, and then Adrian talks him round, and then we get the triumphant music. You had to find a change in the story, because it was no longer the 80s or the 90s. It's a new century, an older Rocky, and an older Rocky facing different problems. He's lonely. He's got nothing to live for anymore. Adrian's gone, and he spends that time visiting the old places, the pet shop and the this. And Paulie says, "I can't do this anymore, Rock. It's depressing." And he, goes up, but that's all Rocky's got. I mean, Rocky spends so much time at the cemetery talking to his wife's grave. He's got a chair up in the tree. I mean, that in and of itself must tell you something about how Rocky spends his time. And then he
Yeah.
finds, he fight he his fighter's heart sort of comes through to him after the computer fight, and he starts thinking, that's when Putty says, "What, you haven't peaked yet." I love that line. And he finds a new lease of life. And then that little girl, that little Marie, that swore at him in the Rocky 1976. He meets her again. Different actress, by the way.
Oh,
Um,
I didn't know that.
yeah, it's different actress. Yeah. Um, but he sort of reconnects with her and reconnects with a little bit of his past, and someone he tried to help all those years ago, he can now help again, because I think Rocky's a character that likes to help people. He had his service, if you like. He's always trying to help people, and he loves the people around him. So yeah, God, I
Well,
love Rocky. It's so good.
I think one of the elements, and I think we've kind of both been very clear about it on how we feel about the franchise, about how Rocky experiences ups and downs, just like the rest of us, and he continues to go on. And it's the idea of, do you go on no matter what happens in your life? And I think relatively, he's been given, he portrays dealing with these situations realistically, dealing with the good and the bad. And the other day, Russ, I had no I was watching something that was pre Super Bowl, and they had these athletes who were training, and of course it was a training montage, and immediately my first thought of training montage is always Rocky, even when it's they don't have the great music that we love, these fantastic 80s songs, even or 70s songs or whatever songs they are in these training montages. I always think of Rocky. I cannot help but think of Rocky when I think about a training montage. And, I think what's so fantastic, clearly training montages have the music and then they have the workout with it. But honestly, I think that these particular training montages in Rocky feel so they're so enjoyable to watch. Like it doesn't feel fabricated. It feels like this person is a real person, and he's really, training in the gym, and you can see him sparring and, picking up rocks, or, running in the snow or through the streets of Philadelphia. Certainly is something we've seen people do. That's not so far fetched. That doesn't feel like it's without reach, or something that you wouldn't see a real person who's in training would be doing. But it also becomes a guilty pleasure for someone like me, Russ, because I get to see all these acts of strength and endurance and ability and agility and just everything you can possibly imagine. It's I think in this particular case, since we're talking about male boxers, it is very satisfying to watch, Russ, to watch these men in peak performance with incredible physical conditioning, time and time again, showing them flexing, showing how strong they are, showing their endurance, because we know how hard this was a physically demanding movie to make, in addition to mentally demanding. So now you have to show this ability that you have physically, and now all of a sudden, with boxing shorts on, and that's all. You've got to step in a ring with 1,000 lights on you, do what you're supposed to do according to what's in the script, be okay with close-ups. I'm sure they had to put those plasters on them or whatever it is, the spirit gum to make the bruising or whatever they did, Russ. This was quite an involved machination, and they still had to look good. Pretty much, not very many clothes. They were in peak form. We saw incredible athleticism. So I have to say, I almost feel like he almost perfected a lot of times. Must have been some of the most enjoyable parts to film are these training montages. But in Rocky Four, where he probably does this in the other films too, where he'll duplicate the same training sequence, one with technology, one old school. Instead of using a rowing machine, the other person is pulling somebody on a sled instead of using the technology on the track he's running in the snow. It was just a lot of fun to kind of see this play back and forth. But the music as well, Russ, you mentioned Bill Conti writing the theme. And then, of course, we had some other amazing people like Survivor, who I think wrote Eye of the Tiger, these inspirational songs
And Burning Heart, yeah.
that people are still playing on the radio. Every now and then you hear somebody play it. And, and of course, that commercial that I sent you the other day, the training montage, it's actually much longer than the one I sent you. That was the commercial, but there's like a 5-minute version where, it's the training montage, and it is great. And they have to do close-ups of muscles. There's a lot of muscle close-ups and grunting and, like you actually get to hear, like in this, it's absolutely fantasy, reality, maleness. It's pure, it's beautiful, it's absolutely like a man flowering. At least that's how I look at it. I think it's great that they show us this incredible physical condition in it. For me, my favorite training montage, as you already know, is in Rocky Four. Do you have a favorite training montage, Russ?
Everybody's favorite montage is Rocky Four. It's literally a back-to-back training one. It's literally like Rocky has a training montage, Adrian arrives, and then he has another training montage. It's so awesome. It's so awesome. This probably about 20 minutes after his awesome flashback montage. No, Rocky Four is the best, the best training montage of them all. I mean, it's probably the greatest training montage of all time, right? But many of the Rocky films actually, why the training montages, because of the awesome music and all the rest of it, but they often have something unique in them. Like again, these are sort of cliches now, but Rocky punching raw meat in the slaughterhouse. Never seen that before. And so that was like a unique thing as part of the training montage. The other thing was one-arm push-ups. Who'd ever seen that before? You'd ever seen one-arm push-ups before, Rocky? Because I certainly hadn't. In Rocky 2, right, there's the thing with the kids and all the rest of it, but
Yes.
he's doing pull-ups before that, because that's got a back-to-back training montage as well. But before that, he's doing one-handed chin-ups, like he's holding onto his wrist, and he's in this kids' playground doing that. Um, and Rocky Rocky 3, God bless it, for its famous moment when they go jumping into the sea together, which has been memed on so many times. Yeah, and of course, then you've got Rocky 4. Rocky 5 doesn't really have one. But the Rocky Balboa training montage is unique because, like, Tony Burton, Duke, as his character in the film, with his massive eyebrows now he's got in Rocky Balboa, he says, we just, you're not fast, you're not this, but so we're gonna have to concentrate on power. You're gonna have to concentrate on, hitting with mean hurting bombs that he's gonna feel all the way back to his ancestors, right? And then you just get Rocky, Stallone, himself, like picking up chains and massive heavy weights and all that stuff. Yeah, it's really inspiring. They do. There was a tennis player in the 2000s called Leighton Hewitt, an Australian guy, and he,
Mhm.
I don't think he ever won a Wimbledon, but he certainly won a few tournaments. And
He was in the top 5 or top
yeah,
10 at some point.
right, he would always watch Rocky 4 before he went out on the court. It was like to get himself pumped up.
Really?
100%. I heard the interview when he said it.
Wow, that's amazing. And it is very interesting. And certainly a lot has been said about the athleticism in the films of pretty much many of the men, not just the stars. But I've seen things in Rocky that I had never seen before, like where they help with the conditioning of. I did not know there are a lot of things that obviously I didn't know about boxing until I saw Rocky, where you have to be able to take a punch, so they kind of condition you.
Mhm.
When you go sparring, a lot of it is so you can kind of be accustomed to getting blows. There was even one where someone was like kind of like hitting him in his core, and I'm
With the
like,
medicine ball.
yeah, I was like, what is he doing? And so of course I was explained. Someone explained to me it was just to kind of give that ability to handle this stuff. But I do want to talk about Black actors and athletes in this franchise. And, we see some of the most extraordinary relationships here, athleticism. And we see at around the same time in the 1970s, there were a lot of these exploitation films. And, I kind of thought it was very interesting that pretty much Rocky does quite a lot for showcasing Black actors. Why was it important for, let's say, Sylvester Stallone to do this? He could have picked anyone to be who he was fighting against, even if he was basing it on a real life situation. But we noticed, if you notice, Russ, there are a lot of Black actors who are not just the fighters, but also the people who are doing the training, and a lot of other characters that are incredibly important in the franchise. What do you think about how they're showcased in the Rocky IP?
I don't particularly think that they are showcased. And this is again, this is good casting as opposed to stunt casting. Clearly Apollo Creed is a Muhammad Ali, you know, substitute, and he was always going to be African American. And Stallone said as soon as Carl Weathers walked in, it was like, well, that's clearly Apollo Creed, and Carl Weathers say, yeah, of course I can box, and he's never done any boxing in his life, but he said that Stallone has gone on record as saying, like, Carl Weathers is a born athlete. He's a superlative athlete. He used to be an American football player. I think he hurt his knee, but he a natural athlete, and it would make sense that, like, I forget which part of Los Angeles Apollo is from, but he is from a predominantly African American area, which is why you see when he goes back to, take you back, in Rocky 3, takes him back to the old gym, and of course it's full of black fighters, and of course, Paulie is revealed to be, the sort of racist racist uncle and all the rest of it, or mildly racist uncle. But no, I don't think Stallone ever made a big deal about Clubber Lang being a black guy, or Apollo Creed being a black guy, or being trained by Duke, who's a black. It's just not a thing. So is it is it important culturally? I would imagine it kind of is, but it's never mentioned in Rocky.
Is it important in the boxing sphere? Sort of like, is it how boxing really is? I've never
Yeah,
stepped.
it's how sport really is. It's one of the things that really irritated me in when England won the Women's European Cup, and as soon as they won the cup, the usual suspects were out complaining, saying, that the team wasn't diverse enough, as if it had been some sort of white supremacist conspiracy only to pick these players for England. I can tell you for an absolute fact, my daughter played football to a reasonably high level, and she now boxes. Right, with football, soccer, or American football or boxing, they don't care if you're green. They just want the best players. They just want the best players, and that is true of boxing. I mean, how many African, or I can't say African American because Anthony Joshua's black, right? So how many black champions have we had? Frazier, Ali, Joshua, Lewis, lots of black guys out there. Not so many white guys, in fact. So no, I don't really think that the color of your skin is going to hold you back in sport per se. And certainly not in boxing. The evidence is there. If we think back through, I'm just trying to think of some. We've got Tyson Fury, we got Alexander Usyk, and we had the Klitschko's for many years. But before that, I'm struggling to think. And even not just heavyweights. If you go down the weights, Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvelous Martin Hagler, Tommy Hearns, lots of black fighters. So no, I don't think that it
Yes.
has any bearing.
Well, it is interesting because at that period of time when we had a lot of black exploitation films, which might not have been the most realistic representation of life or even African Americans, this film, Rocky franchise, shows real life characters. These guys feel very real because they probably do exist somewhere, and including the athleticism. It is nice to see that, and it's incredibly entertaining to watch as well. And what's also interesting about the franchise, and you did touch on this, Russ, about you don't have to be a winner to win. Can you explain just briefly how the mechanics of the Rocky franchise has deciphered this formula of whether or not a win is or isn't needed?
Because winning or not winning for Rocky will always serve the narrative. For Rocky, in Rocky 1, he didn't have to win the championship of the world to be a winner. He just had to be a winner in his own eyes. He had to be standing at the end of the film. And that's why in the 14th round, Apollo knocks him over, and and Mickey's going, stay down. And Rocky gets to his feet, and, beckons Apollo on. And Apollo puts his hand out, and you can see it's such a brilliant piece of acting by Carl Weathers. He looks at his corner, he can't believe it. He can't believe it. And then he goes into attack Rocky, and Rocky breaks his ribs, and then they have that, and Rocky nearly wins. He nearly knocks him out, and then Apollo's saved by the bell, and they have a split decision. But it served the narrative for Rocky to be a winner in his own eyes. That's all he needed to complete that story. Because who knew it was going to go on to be a world-beating franchise? Certainly not Sylvester Stallone. So that movie has a beginning, middle, and a satisfying ending. What is weird about it, though, is you've really got to listen carefully and watch carefully to see who wins that fight, because it's actually not very clear. It's clear to me because I've seen it 50 million times. I think with the success of Rocky 1, it was a pretty safe bet that they were going to get another one after Rocky 2. They knew Rocky 2 would probably be very successful. Of course, it was. Serves the narrative, right? Rocky has to win that one, because if Rocky loses in Rocky 2, then he's a two-time challenger, two-time loser. Where does Rocky Balboa go? He has to win that fight. And again, he overcomes things in that movie. He overcomes physical disability. He has to learn to fight, right-handed, because he's got the problem with his eye, which miraculously gets healed with plastic surgery in Rocky 3. But if he doesn't win that one, then where do we go from here? But at least if he does win that one, then he finally wins the championship and we'll draw a line under the franchise. No, Rocky 3, well, he has to lose in that one, and he wins in that one. And there's a line in Rocky 3 where the journalist is saying, the word is that this is Rocky's last fight, win, lose or draw. So again, Stallone's giving himself an out. Rocky loses everything and then comes out on top. And of course, then Rocky 4, the most successful one of the franchise. Even though Rocky wins, Apollo dies, so Rocky sort of loses his best mate in all of that. But again, that fight's not for the championship. It's an unsanctioned bout in Russia. It doesn't count, but it does count. It means everything to both. It means everything to the Russian nation, and it means everything to Rocky and the American people, because Rocky ended the Cold War, as we all know. Actually, there's a spoof documentary with a lot of American boxing commentators all on it, like really famous guys talking about how Balboa ended the Cold War. If you haven't seen it, you should look it up. It's absolutely fantastic.
I will check it out. And of course, you and I have been talking about competitive boxing over the past few years, and how there have been changes, let's say from the 70s to present day. And I don't really know. I mean, I've spoken to my mother about this, about, I guess, let's say back in the day, we're talking about 1950s and 60s. There used to be very, very, very long rounds. The idea that someone would box for more than a certain number of rounds today, that's something that's not done. But back in the day, I guess there used to be boxers who would just take punches and, try and last for as many rounds as they can. But that seems to be something that might have changed very much today. And of course, we also know that, we now have this MMA that's also very popular. But despite the changes in, let's say, boxing matches, regulations, and even other additional types of boxing style sports. Russ, to you, what is the legacy of the Rocky cinematic IP?
I would say, first of all, on the rounds, um, all the way through the 80s, and for as far back as I can remember, rounds were always 3 minutes, but we used to have 15 rounds. Now the championship distance is 12 rounds, because the medical science proved that boxers, as they got older, the brain damage would really happen in those last 3 rounds, and that's why those last 3 rounds were cut off, because it's much safer. It's also why women's boxing only have 2 minute rounds, although there's some sort of debate over that. So they think they might go for three, but women's boxing has 2 minute, 10 rounds of 2 minutes for championship bouts. So what's the legacy of the Rocky franchise? Is that the question?
Yes, to you, in your personal opinion, what is the legacy of the Rocky cinematic IP, in your own words?
Um, for me personally, certainly my second novel was a complete rip-off of Rocky 4. I'll give it that. If you ever read my second book, it's literally beat for beat Rocky 4. So thank you, Mr. Stallone. Um, it's had such a profound effect. I loved it as a child. Like I said to you earlier on, Rocky's been there for me my whole life. So as long as I can remember, well, since I was 11 years old, but as long as I can really, I mean, you can really remember stuff from when you're that age. Like I said, my stepdad getting me the pirate video cassette from the cinema and all that kind of stuff. And it's just something. I love those films so much. Moreover, as Reese Mack he's putting some words down here: rags to riches, beating the odds, motivation, and all that. Inspiration is a key word. I watch a guy on YouTube called Viking Samurai, and he's not alone in this. People like Stallone, um, and John Claude Van Damme and all the rest, but we were specifically speaking about Sylvester Stallone, inspired so many young men to look like that, to stay fit, to stay healthy, stay fit and strong. And you got to look at Stallone to this day. The guy's 75 years old. He looks better than I do.
It looks incredible.
He looks amazing. I mean, all right, there's a little bit of human growth hormone involved there, I'm sure, but he has inspired millions upon millions upon millions of people around the world to be writers, to be filmmakers, to be boxers. You name me a boxer to boxing today that wasn't inspired by a Rocky film. There are very, very, very few and far between that who didn't watch Rocky and then go and want to be a boxer. Um, yeah, he's an inspirational guy, Sylvester Stallone, a very, very talented man. And it's not only Rocky. He's given the world two vastly different characters in John Rambo and Rocky Balboa. The two guys are polar opposites, and those franchises deliver you uh, an entirely different experience. But to put Rambo to one side, Rocky's got a good message. Rocky's never going to give you a dour message, which is why I guess they changed the ending of Rocky 5. You come out of a Rocky film feeling inspired. You come out of a Rocky film feeling hopeful. You come out of a Rocky film wanting to go down the gym. You want to go running. You want to go and do all these things. They're uplifting movies. And you know what? They're not cynical. They're not. There's no deconstruction of Rocky. Rocky never gets sort of deconstructed. They tried to deconstruct him a little bit in Creed, but I think Stallone put his foot down, which is why he didn't want to do this third one. Like, I think there's been not animosity, but I just think the direction that Michael B. Jordan wanted to go with the new franchise was not a direction. In fact, yes, it's come to me. Stallone said they started to go down a dark path, and that's not
Well,
and that's not Rocky's path.
we're not addressing those films
Mm.
in this discussion. We are focusing mainly on from Rocky to Rocky Balboa. So at another time we can talk about the Creed series if you wish, Russ. But right now we're just going to focus on the ones from Rocky to Rocky Balboa.
Yeah, for sure. But as I say, I just think that he's such an inspirational character. The films are inspirational, and they're not cynical, and they don't go down a dark path. You kind of always know what you're going to get with a Rocky film, and that's you're going to come out of the cinema from watching it on the couch, you're going to be feeling good about yourself. And like I just said, he's inspired many, many people in many, many different fields. I look at his writing, and I wish that I was 1/10 as good as Sylvester Stallone. He's an amazing guy, and he's given us so many amazing films over the years. Rocky, Rambo, Expendables, Escape to Victory. I love that movie. Nighthawks. He's an amazing guy. I'm a big, big fan of his. I really, really am. And yeah, here's to Rocky Balboa. Nice one, champ.
Well, I love that synopsis of the legacy. That certainly is the legacy of the cinematic IP there. For me, I think there are some things that I would add to it, and it does stem around the fact that there is no cynicism. And for me, it really is showing men how they really are. And I think that if anything, this film demonstrates that men are very dynamic people, that they have emotions and they have things and dreams that they want to accomplish. And sometimes to get to those dreams, you have to do things in a different way. There are different options, but life isn't always hearts and flowers, and men can handle it. And I think that that's the theme here for me, is kind of just the extraordinary power of a man when he puts his motivation towards reaching that goal. He can do it. And so while boxing is maybe not everyone's dream, I think that if this film inspires people to go after their dreams, just even in general, it's accomplished its goal. But we do see accomplishments of men, some extraordinary things that I think are just spectacular. And men are dynamic, they have emotions. And, I think that the way that we see how the men in these films handle their emotions is very interesting, and perhaps more reflective of how men may be in real life. So much to a point where I do enjoy seeing those moments where, as you said, Sylvester Stallone said that the boxing was something else. It's actually a story about a man dealing with these things in his life. I like this more. It feels more of a wholesome representation of a man to me, a more realistic representation of that does due diligence for male characters. So I enjoy seeing the characters in the story, even if it's on the other side. I do enjoy seeing this because they're going after their dreams and they're not letting anything stand in their way. And there's this hope that each one of them. You and I talked about this, Russ, that these boxers go into the ring, they don't believe they're going to lose that match.
That's
I really
absolutely
like
true.
that idea of Russ. I really love this, whether it's a boxing match or something else. The notion of believing that you are going to win and you're going to achieve that goal no matter what, I think is so important and such an interesting way to approach things in life. And on top of all this, Russ, we also know that you don't have to win to be a winner. These movies teach you that very clearly. You don't have to have gotten the prize in order to win, especially the first film, where he realizes that he's come so far that, you know, perhaps he has won and gotten everything he wants in his life at that point when he's calling out to Adrian at the end. For me, that's what that represents. Sometimes your life has shifts and changes, but you know, you still go on. Also going on when things don't seem like you could really go on. Can you do this? There's a process to get to that point, to make that decision. It's not an overnight decision, is it, Russ? And we see the stages where Rocky goes along the way to make these difficult decisions in life, because it's not easy to make decisions that are going to affect your life. So I like that it's not sort of like a snap decision. There has to be the journey as to why he's making the decisions he's making. And it's very well thought out. Like, for example, when he tries to do a different job, and he goes through so many, they could have shown you just one, but he goes through so many places to get a position. It's not
Yeah,
just
Rocky too. Yeah.
he probably went to about 100 places, every place in town, to get something. Even the time when he says to the boss who's going to let him go from the meat packing factory, where the man says, I have to let you go. You know, we're reducing, you're the last person on the totem pole, so you have the least seniority, I have to let you go. And you know what he says? Rocky doesn't get upset about this. He says, could you keep me on? I'll take less pay for the work.
Mm.
It's exactly that type of thing where he's just needs to make as much as he can. He does not care, almost to a point. He just needs to be employed. And the guy says, I can't do that. There's union rules, right? The union won't allow him to pay a worker less. But it's that idea that, you know, it really is a process. It wasn't sort of one or two things that happened to him. And he is a man, and he's going to fight through this. And no matter what the outcome is, he's still going to be this man filled with integrity. And he depicts the characters, regardless of side, with integrity. Even if they do something that might not be the right thing all the time, it's still depicted with integrity. And I think that is why I think most people will see the legacy of it, because it depicts men as how I view men. So it's incredibly satisfying to see a man in a sort of a more whole representation, more elements of what makes up a man, so to speak. That's how I look at it. I'm not a man. I'm a woman looking at it, of how I imagine men to be. I don't know if that's true or not, but gee, he sure is a very nice man, and there are a lot of very nice men in this story. So there is that, and I think that that's very appealing as a woman. And yes, it is true. The conditioning is also very appealing to watch, but overall, the character of the man is what I think attracts a lot of women to this. And I had to turn it off after. I was like, I'm not going to look at the training montages anymore. I'm not gonna,
I think it's you know, Rocky himself, you know, kind of inspires you. You know, like it does make you believe you can achieve things. And you know, when Rocky was young and he's doing all these things, it's interesting, but it's, you know, and it's inspiring, and you believe that, you know, he makes you believe you can do stuff. It inspires you. You know, you come out of the movies inspired to do something, to write, to train, to whatever it's going to be. It's interesting is that as Rocky gets older, you know, when you were talking about the union rules and all that kind of stuff, in Rocky Balboa, his son is living, he believes, under his father's shadow, and he sort of, you know, calls Rocky out about this. And then there's that really famous speech where Rocky says, you know, let me tell you something you already know. Life isn't about how hard you can hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done, because that's sort of like Rocky's mantra. You know, he's taken a lot of hits, emotional hits in his life. You know, Mickey died, Apollo died, Adrian died. You know, it's he's suffered his fair share of losses. Eventually, you know, you don't, it's not, it's in the second thing. Even Paulie dies in the end, you know, and it's just Rocky. Um, but yeah, I think he, you know, it's a good message, inspiring message. You know, go for it. That's Rocky's motto, isn't it? Just go for it, which Nike, I guess, stole. But you know, he says it to, he challenges Clubber Lang with it. Yeah, but it's just inspirational and heartwarming, action-packed, thrilling, inspiring, all everything. I think Stallone achieved with Rocky Balboa everything that Stallone wanted to achieve with Rocky Balboa. You know, when he looks back at the legacy and the millions upon millions of people he's inspired to better themselves, and countless more millions who might not have been inspired to do anything, but have been made happy by those films. Certainly, I'm one of them, right? But those films make me happy, and they've made me happy since I was a little child. I've never come out of a Rocky, even Rocky Five. I quite liked. You know, it's the black sheep of the family. But you know, you watch a Rocky film, it's like wearing a pair of slippers and putting a blanket around you. They're just lovely to watch, and yeah, very very talented man. And thank you, Sylvester Stallone, for all the gifts you've given us.
Yes, thank you, Sylvester Stallone, for everything. It is enjoyable to watch. As far as I'm concerned, what a man can achieve, regardless of the win or loss, what a man can achieve, I think, is represented so well here. Russ, thank you for joining me today to talk about the Rocky Cinematic IP. It was such a wonderful discussion and questions and answers. You answered all my questions. Russ, where can people find you?
Oh, you can normally find me on Positive Fandom on a Sunday morning with my wonderful host RM, or you can hit me up on my website at russellwhitfield.com. I just wanted to say before I ask where we can find you is thank you to everybody in the chat for tuning in. I don't know, some of you might know RM and I do a show on a Sunday. We normally address the chats as we're going through. We only had kind of limited time for this particular stream. We want to kind of keep the cinematic legacy streams to an hour, so we couldn't sort of really go through it. Otherwise, we'd be here for 3 or 4 hours. But your comments are well noted and well received, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning in and checking out Rocky with us. And all that said, where can they find you, RM?
Well, Russ, as you've already said, you and I do a show on Sundays, right, on Positive Fandom, my YouTube channel, called Sunday Brunch at 10:30 a.m. in the mornings, where we do all the parlay and the fandom. But you can also find me here on the Burnett Network for Ladies of the PGS with Lorena Creel at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Mondays. You can also find me on a show like this that Russ and I are doing called PGS Moving Image, where we talk about cinematic IPs. And pretty much we're going to be talking about any kind of video that has had an impact and done well. So we will continue this series along that way. And you can also find me on the 1/6 Scale Man Network for Uncivilized Scoundrels going forward. Tonight, guys, you can find me streaming with Robert and Layel on Midnight Musings. And I will also be doing a review with Julian Mushkin, Picard Season 3, Episode 1 at 11, right before Musing. So please do check that out. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson, my moderator and friend and collaborator. We are all goof people. Thank you so much, Tom, for everything. And everybody in the chat who are just such a wonderful community here, the PGS and Positive Fandom, and all the other creators who showed up tonight to watch this. And anybody who is watching on the replay, thank you so much for choosing the Burn Network and watching PGS Moving Image. On behalf of myself and Russ, thank you, and Tom. And Russ, as we draw this to a close, I always like to say at the end of every broadcast, guys, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always remember to please be kind. Take care,
Thanks so
everybody.
much, guys. Cheers, cheers.